And well, it was last evening when Republic TV had exposed how Amnesty India is peddling anti-India propaganda. Now Republic is bringing you part 2 of the same story. Shravan Sen, our senior news editor, will be joining us very shortly as he has accessed a 50-page report that exposes the amnesty completely. This is part 2 of the report, as the second amnesty report has been accessed. This 50-page report that exposes the amnesty completely and details on every Kashmir deal that was struck, the full breakup of the Kashmir projects that were looked into by the amnesty, and how the anti-India report deliverables were put out. All the details that will be put out by Shravan Sen, our senior news editor. Now, days after Amnesty International India was issued a show-cause notice by the ED on the alleged violation of FEMA, Republic TV bringing you details exposing Amnesty India's business dealings and detailing the findings of probe agencies' investigation in this matter, and how contracts were allegedly entered into, including relating those of Kashmir. This, in fact, is part 2 of the same report, rather the second amnesty report that has been accessed by my colleague and our senior news editor Shravan Sen, a 50-page report that puts out every detail of what exactly had happened. In fact, it has come to light how Amnesty International UK had allegedly been remitting large amounts of foreign contribution through its Indian entities, and documents that further state that Amnesty International India had received funds to the tune of 36 crore rupees for 3 purposes that also include that of the Kashmir deal that was struck. Shravan Sen now joining us on this broadcast. Shravan, first up, sensational details that we've revealed so far. Take us through the second amnesty report that you've accessed.
Well, this was part 1 of the expose that we did last night, and now we are getting you the full 50-page annexure, which gives us details of every project that has been signed by Amnesty International. I'll quickly ask my camera person to come closer to this particular report that we have accessed, which will give you details of this entire project. I'll ask my camera person to come a little closer here. Now, that's the first project that you're talking about, the Kashmir Access to Justice. Now, this is about 46,867 pounds. This is the amount of money that Amnesty has got to produce a report called Kashmir Access to Justice. Once again, the payments have been divided 50%, 25% and 25%. What's very interesting here is that they're talking about an advance that comes in before when the agreement is signed. Then you talk about 25% balance, which is given at a later stage, and finally after the completion of report. Now, what's very interesting here is that where have you really looked at deliverables? This word deliverables, it's in this very agreement that has been signed. Here they're talking about how they're going to produce what they're going to produce in the report. They're going to produce an Amnesty International standard research report analyzing barriers to justice in 10 individual cases to be illustrative and emblematic. Then they give also details of AFSPA and all of the court prosecutions and etc. that would be done. All of it is pre-decided as to what this report is going to look like. Now, this is just one of them. Let's move to another such case where you have, once again, money that is being received by Amnesty India. Now, this is an agreement that is being signed by Amnesty UK and Amnesty India. What I would like to put in perspective is that Amnesty India has now become a commercial entity. What they're doing is they're making profits. What we are placing it as is Kashmir for profits, because where else would you really find that they discuss the scope of this entire research, where they're specifically saying what the report is going to talk about? They're getting money in exchange. What are they really telling the government? They're telling the government that we are receiving these funds for exports of goods and services. Exports of goods and services, when they were basically asked to produce invoices and documents, they have failed to do so, and this is what they were doing in return. These are reports that are being prepared by Amnesty. I'll ask my camera person to come back to the second part of this particular expose. Once again, look at another such contract that was signed by Amnesty India. This is also termed as Access to Justice Research, for which they were getting £43,500, all inclusive of the taxes. Yet again, the payment has been divided, advance of £27,000 and then another £27,000 that comes in at a later stage. Agreement signed in the year 2014. Once again, this same thing has the same sort of agreement that has been signed, where they're talking about the deliverables. They're saying that the report shall highlight and make recommendations to address the barriers of justice that have allowed hundreds of alleged human rights violations to occur and go unpunished in Jammu and Kashmir, despite overwhelming documentation and evidence implicating the security forces. Similarly, there you would find multiple such contracts that have been signed. Here again, you have another contract that was basically signed in the year 2015, once again called Access to Justice Research Project. And look at the amount you are talking about. We are talking about £65,000, £65,000 for one research project in Kashmir. This is just one such project that we're talking about. Multiple such projects which is costing over £50,000, where they're pre-deciding is going to look like. Let's go back to this document. Once again, in this particular agreement, they're talking about the supplier here is basically referred to as Amnesty India. Amnesty India will produce a report and supplementary materials on impunity for security forces in Jammu and Kashmir, facilitated by laws and barriers to justice for survivors of human rights violation in the state. The report will be titled as Denied Access to Justice for Victims of Human Rights Violation. And mind you, viewers, the name of the project is also decided much before. When the agreement is basically signed, it doesn't leave any room for any accommodation of what they really find on the ground. And we'll try and prove that also, because what's happening on the ground is never reflected in the reports that have been prepared by Amnesty India. A case in point is the recent report that was basically filed by Amnesty India, where they have very conveniently forgotten certain incidents that took place, terrorist activities that took place in Kashmir. I'll come back to that. But one more such project, one more agreement I would like to show, which is over £1,65,000. Now, this is Access to Justice campaign support. Here, this is extremely important because we are talking about deliverables here where there's a political connection that emerges. They're saying opposition and some ruling party MLAs in the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly have demanded information to be provided on the cases of 15 families identified in the report. So even before the report is prepared, they are deciding that there would be 15 families who will be identified in the report. Then they're also saying that the opposition and ruling party MLAs will be taking parts of that very report and justifying what they have been saying. Important to point out here is that there appears to be some sort of a nexus which is in place. You would have, on the one hand, media taking up these reports. On the other, you would have political parties taking details of this report that has been prepared by Amnesty, for which, once again, Amnesty is receiving funds. There are multiple such projects. Now, yet another project which was signed in the year 2017, under the same heading of access to campaign support. But this is important because you have the PSA Act being raised by Amnesty India. And remember, this became a hugely contentious issue, and no wonder why they would have picked it up. This is exactly what they're explaining. The supplier shall provide campaign support on the report and supplementary materials produced by Amnesty International in July 2015, covering impunity for security forces. Once again, targeting the security forces in Jammu and Kashmir. Similarly, they have got multiple such agreements that they have signed. This is the last such agreement that was signed in the year 2018 and 19. I'll ask my camera person to show this page first. This is the page to be shown first. This is 2018 and 19, where the agreement was signed, called as Access to Justice Campaign Support. Once again, look at the amount that they are basically charging for preparing this report. And they're talking about the milestones that they're going to achieve after this particular report is filed, where they're saying offline drive to get students to sign postcards to ban pellet guns and submit the postcards to Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, submit 15 cases of pellet victims to UNSR on torture and extrajudicial executions, and finally advocacy in Jammu and Kashmir, ensuring that the issue is discussed by legislators. So all in all, last night when we got you all the contract details of these contracts that were basically signed between Amnesty International and Amnesty International India Private Limited, remember, it becomes abundantly clear that this is not an NGO that we are talking about. This is a commercial entity we are talking about, who's only making profits. When asked by the government that where are you essentially getting this money from and what is the money being used for, they're essentially saying that this is for exports of goods and services. Today, they have been exposed. The export for goods and services is nothing but those fake reports that they come up. A case in point, let me tell you viewers, is a recent report that they have filed, and they've conveniently forgotten how a shopkeeper in Parimpora area in Srinagar was shot dead by terrorists, and this did not find any mention in the report that was filed by Amnesty.
Absolutely, Shravan, incriminating details, and even as we look at the larger picture, it looks like a very one-sided malicious propaganda. If I can also bring in Pooja Prasanna, our South Bureau Chief at this point. She's with us on this broadcast. Pooja, any reaction from Amnesty India so far?
Absolutely none. Not only on this special investigation that Shravan has brought to us, but even when we had put forth questions about the one-sided, biased and false report that they had put out a few days ago, where they claimed that there were gross human rights violations basis some sketchy reports that they had tried to, in fact, cite in that statement. So far, it has only been one-side communication. They release statements, Suvesha, but do not entertain any queries or clarifications post that. Perhaps the reason is in the documents that Shravan is bringing to us today, because we had, in fact, questioned Amnesty on where they're actually getting, the reports of, youth and children being picked up in the middle of the night in Kashmir, as they were claiming, and also several people being, arrested, mass arrests, and also several other human rights violations that they claimed were taking place in Kashmir, but did not cite any report, any basis, either governmental or otherwise, for making such very, very serious allegations. Now, perhaps it is, unraveling, because, the kind of funds that they have been getting and the purpose with which it is being deposited. We're talking, of course, Suvesha, money to the tune of 36 crores. The reasons, the explanations, at best can be described as dubious. So it, in a sense, gives a backgrounder as to why they have chosen to remain mum, and particularly and deliberately vague when asked about where they are getting the reports about any kind of disruption of normalcy in Kashmir is concerned. And the same could also be said of why they are not reporting certain incidents from Kashmir, be it that shopkeeper who was killed by terrorists, or even other, casualties of terror in Kashmir Valley.
Absolutely. And Shravan, if I can come back to you, because that exactly is the question, that how is a human rights organization indulging in such commercial entity, is becoming such a commercial entity? And I also want to understand from you how the agencies are now pursuing this further.
Suvesha, let's just put this in perspective. It all started when the Ministry of Home Affairs raised the red flag with regards to the FCRA regulations, because when they basically started off, they started off as a trust, but they were not given the FCRA approval, did not come in, which was basically red flagged by the Ministry of Home Affairs, saying that they cannot get in those inward remittances. What they eventually did was they became a private commercial entity, and that's when they started getting these funds. What they started doing was, every time that they were basically questioned about the funds that they were receiving, they said that this was for exports of goods and services. It's a clear violation, number one, of the FDI norms, and secondly, we are given to understand that this is also comes under the violation of FEMA, which is basically a provision of the Enforcement Directorate, and it's a clear violation that they're looking at. Now, the probe details that we have also got is that there are certain people from Amnesty who were called in for questioning by the Enforcement Directorate. In fact, the top management of Amnesty International haven't really been able to convince the investigative agencies with regards to how exactly have they utilized the money, and more importantly, where are the invoices of these very projects that they are talking about.
All right, Shravan and Pooja, for the moment, I'd like to thank you. And of course, we'll continue to get more voices on this story. But it is time for us to slip into a very short commercial break.